It is 1 minute 2. Is recording. We got one. Oh, Tatiana's here.
Her to give the talk.
What's that?
To tell Tatiana to give the talk.
Well, it is 3 o'clock. If I have anyone. If any agents come in from Kentucky that need continuing education credits, you need to type in the chat box with your name, county. If others would like to type in the chat box to let us know where you are from, that would be helpful to the speaker. My name's Dr. Jackie Jacob at the University of Kentucky, one of 2 poultry specialists here. As part of my job, I also coordinate the Small and Backyard Flocks Community of Practice on E-Extension. And as part of that program, we do monthly webinars. Once the speaker gets talking, I will put our webpage in the chat box where you can see upcoming webinars. And all of our webinars are recorded, including this one. So you will be able to see recordings or share with others if you so desire. So having said all that, this month's webinar is on sanitizing in a poultry house. And this is more for small and backyard flocks rather than the big, huge commercial flocks. And our speaker today is Dr. Tony Pescatore, who is the Associate Chair for the department, but also a poultry extension faculty here at the University of Kentucky. So I will be on mute and I will shut off my video. I am having audio problems, so if I suddenly get dropped, I may have to call back in again. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box or the Q&A app. I will be monitoring both of those. If a question is a clarification of something that Dr. Pescatore is talking about at that time, I will pop up my video and unmute myself and ask for the clarification. If it's something that's already passed or something you just thought about, I'll save those questions to the end. So if you think of them, type in your question, and we'll get around to answering it before we finish. So it's all yours, Dr. Pescatore. I will put myself on mute and stop my video.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jacob. Today we're going to talk about sanitation and how we clean and take care of a poultry house. No matter what the size of the house, the same principles are going to apply. And it's a way of doing 2 things. One, it's a way of preventing disease from entering your poultry house. It's a way of keeping disease from establishing itself in your poultry house. And it's a way to deal with when you have a disease and you want to break that cycle. So all 3 of those things, preventing, stopping the distribution of it, and curing or reducing the effects of a disease outbreak is what we're talking about today. Biosecurity is the number one thing we need to keep in mind. It is measures that we take to prevent diseases and are essential for poultry flock owners. Things that we do in biosecurity are the things that prevent disease from occurring. And that's the number one thing. If we can keep disease out of a flock, that's the best thing we can achieve. Because once we have a disease on a facility, we're fighting that disease for not only the birds that are on the farm now, but for future flocks. So the first thing that includes in a good biosecurity plan is good management, making sure that our facilities are secure and that we practice isolation, controlling the flow and things of that nature. In addition, we need to know what are the steps we're going to take to clean a facility. So whether it's between birds or whether it's because of a disease outbreak, what is the protocol we're going to follow with sanitation? And I also, in a biosecurity, it also includes a sound nutrition program. If we put stress on the birds, whether it's nutritional or environmental, it exposes the birds to being more susceptible to diseases. Anytime we talk about biosecurity or keeping that flock isolated, we need to make sure we understand that we can do things very simply in the beginning by controlling flow into the farm that we can't do once a disease is established. And chemicals are not a substitute for good management. Good management is the key. Making sure we do those management practices are what we need to do. And the first thing we really need to always think about is the water source. Clean water is the least expensive nutrient component. And it's very important for not only keeping stress off the birds, but also we'll see here a little later is that we can have some problems with our water flow or our water systems as being a source of some organisms. Isolation or control of a facility. When you think of the things that can transmit diseases, anything can be that. It can be living or non-living. It can be different ways that we carry disease into our birds. And the problem is that even though we practice good isolation and take care of our birds, we also have to understand that we can't control everything. Virus particles can travel on the wind and they can go long distances. So we need to make sure that when we place houses, we place them a good distance from other locations. But at the same time, we also have to remember that we need air and ventilation in order for the birds to grow. And pathogens can attach to not only the dust in the house, but they can carry with the equipment, with animals and people as well. People are a number one vector of carrying disease into an organization. So we need to make sure we manage all those things as we talk about keeping the flock isolated. Also, in regards to isolation is what do you need to do when you want to change birds? Now, the best thing for disease control is an all-in, all-out facility. You take all the birds on a farm and you put them in there at the same time. You take them all out at the same time. This is the greatest situation for control of diseases. However, that's not how a lot of our operations work. They're going to have multiple ages on a farm. They're going to have multiple species on a farm. So when we start talking about isolation, we need to know what we have on the farm and how we can deal with it. One is stock replacement. If we're going to bring new birds onto the farm, the best thing to do is bring them in as either hatching eggs or as newly hatched chicks. Those birds have not had a lot of exposure to disease and will carry very few diseases onto your farm. But as many people know, that may not be physically possible or practical for what you're trying to do. So if you have to bring in adult birds or started birds, the thing to remember is we want to quarantine those birds away from the birds you're saving. And when we talk about quarantine, it doesn't just mean their own pen. We also have to think about how we're moving to those birds and away from those birds. So we want to quarantine the birds for 4 weeks or basically 30 days, so that we can see if they're carrying or having a disease or showing signs of a disease. Another trick that you can do is add some of, once you get through the first quarantine period, is you can add some of your original birds to that pen and see over time whether birds get sick. If the original birds get sick, that means the new birds carried in a disease. If the new birds get sick, that means you had a resident disease on your property and the birds, the original flock, were carriers. But what we really want to emphasize is that if you keep the birds isolated from each other during that first 30 days, it's a good sign that we're going to be successful. Most places will also have multiple ages. And we want to move from young birds to older birds. If you think of the young birds, they're more naive. They've not been exposed to many diseases, while the older birds may have been exposed to more diseases and have a developed system. So we want to move from the young birds to the old birds. And if we do have birds, say in a hospital pen or that we're trying to nurse, always do them last. And it's always a good idea, if you're having a disease problem on the farm and you're isolating birds, that you have specific clothing and for specific shoes or boots to wear while you're in those pens. So basically, if you do have a disease out, work from the healthiest to the sickest, and this prevents spread of disease within your flock and keeps it contained within certain populations. Many things carry disease into the house. I always say the only thing that should be in a poultry house is poultry. And many of you have either cats for rodent control or dogs for predator control. Those are fine if you keep them out of the areas where the birds are. We also sometimes like to have visitors on the farm and show off our birds and that, but visitors can carry disease into your flock. So isolation includes any of the animals as well as man. If you're going to work around the house, always wear clean clothing for the poultry houses, and especially your shoes. Don't wear them elsewhere, and don't go from sick pens to clean pens. If you're going to visit other producers or go other places, if you do, change your shoes, change your clothes, wash prior to working with your own flocks. You know, you can be the vector. The other thing about that is we want to limit it who the people are that come onto our farm. So not only with visitors, we want to keep a log of who's coming on, who's going off. And along with that, wild birds, insects, and rodents are good vectors to bring disease into a flock. So an active biosecurity program will include rodent control, a handle on insects, particularly things like the darkling beetle, and the control of wild birds. It's really difficult with the smaller wild birds, but you can discourage them from roosting in the area if you can uh, do some modifications to your house. Now that we talked a little bit about biosecurity, what we really need to start thinking about is, what do we mean by all these terms? The first one is cleaning. We hear about cleaning and disinfecting. What do we really mean by cleaning? Cleaning is removing the foreign material, whether it's dirt or organic materials. It can be blood, it can be broken eggs, anything that's a foreign material from that's on objects or and what we do with cleaning is we have to remember that many of the disinfectants and the sanitizers we're talking about will be inactivated in the presence of foreign material. So we want to start anytime we try to prevent disease or control disease to start with good cleaning. And that includes the equipment as well as the building. And cleaning can be as simple as using water to hose things off, or you can get more a enzymatic product or detergent to add to your water. But the main thing about cleaning is controlling and removing the foreign material. Disinfection is something we do to inactivate and kill pathogens, germs, and bacteria. And we talk about reducing the number of organisms that are on the surface and that do not pose a risk of infection. So one of the things that many people may have misconceptions of it, as an example of having to read the labels. If you look at something like baby wipes, you would think those are disinfecting, but they're not. However, if you look at a thing like handy wipes, they are. And the way you can tell whether it's disinfecting or not is look at the activation or inactivation rate that is on there. A tube of handy wipes will be 99.9% effective as a disinfectant. And these products can range anywhere from 84 to 99.9. If they're a true disinfectant, their activity rate will be on the label. So just an example, a baby wipe will not have that type of rating, while while most baby wipes don't have that rating, but the handy wipe will be an effective disinfectant. Sanitizing, on the other hand, reduces the number of organisms, but it doesn't kill the organisms. It's reducing the level of the harm it's a step below disinfectant. And we're trying to clean the surfaces without having to go to some of those products. It's reducing the number and growth of bacteria, viruses, and fungi. So in a good protocol for poultry houses, we need to start thinking about cleaning. When do we clean? When do we sanitize? When do we disinfect? And all three of those have a place in our disease prevention program. Cleaning itself depends or should be routine. It should be a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, depending on what you're trying to clean. As an example, if you have if you have an open water system, cleaning would involve wiping that system out every day, as opposed to with a closed system. If we're having something that we can't do routinely, then that requires us to remove material or empty feeders, things of that nature. We got to schedule it the way we want. Sanitizing is usually done with equipment that we bring into the house. So if you're bringing in new feeders or water, sanitizing is the proper thing. We also need to sanitize our drinking water system. Disinfectant is usually done when a disease outbreak occurred or we're between flocks. And what we're doing is all the other steps, as well as that final step, to really reduce the number of organisms that are in that house. Sanitation is a way of life when we raise animals, whether it's birds or mammals or reptiles. Sanitation is key, because we can spread diseases very easily with poor sanitation. So the first thing is the simplest sanitation involves a lot of hot water, a lot of some detergent, and a lot of elbow grease where you're scrubbing or washing everything. You must also remember that the first step is cleaning. We have to remove as much dirt, litter, organic material, or debris as possible. And then again, we can't sanitize dirty situations. We need to make sure that we understand a good cleaning program will be effective not only for controlling a disease or preventing a disease, but also allows us to sanitize the equipment. Simple things that you can do on your coop. Have designated shoe wear, clothes, things of that nature. Wash your hands going into the pen and coming out of the pen. You can have or use a sanitizer. Another one is a very cheap thing to do is maintain foot baths into your facilities. They can be simply as it could be a dry bleach in a tub, or it can be liquid. But not only are they a good way of disinfecting or cleaning your feet, it's also a good way of making sure you're not tracking disease from one room to a building to the other. There's dry bleaches that you can buy. They can also make it a wet pad, or it could be a wet pan. But you got to make sure that you properly maintain them. Once they become contaminated with fecal material or dirt, it's time to change the content. One of the phenomena we experience with our water systems is the formation of biofilms. Biofilms are bacteria that adhere to a surface. And that surface can be on the outside of your water pipes or in your feeders. They are the bacteria in your water systems, the waterborne bacteria will come in, they'll attach to the surface area whether it's a pipe or a trough, and a formation of a microcolony will form. The bacteria start reproducing. They then form a matrix, and at some point that biofilm can rupture and spread bacteria. That biofilm needs to be disturbed and cleaned in order to be an effective sanitation program, because that biofilm serves to protect the organisms. And the place we find biofilms the most is inside water lines, particularly if we're not on county or city water, if we're using pond water, or we're using rainwater, things of that nature. They can have a biofilm. So we need to sanitize our water lines. And the whole idea is to reduce the number of organisms in those lines. We also want to make sure, if you're using water lines, especially if you're using tubing, if you notice, a lot of times when you buy tubing for drinker systems, they are actually either a black hose or a blue hose or a colored hose, and they're opaque. That's because if you use clear water lines, algae is going to grow on the inside of them. So if you notice, a lot of places that the lines are opaque. What we want to do with sanitizing, we want to not only control the organisms that are growing and the slime that's being built up, but we can also have mineral deposits. Chlorine is one of the things we can use for not only our water itself, but for using chlorine bleach as one of the ways to oxidize the iron that's in our rust in the pipe water lines. So we can use different products to sanitize those water lines. Because we're using a product that reduces organisms, we don't want to do a water sanitizer anytime we're going to be doing vaccination. So do not use it 48 hours prior to vaccination or 24 hours after vaccination. We just want to do it outside that time frame. Chlorine is one of your best friends. It's an effective gram-negative and gram-positive activity. It'll be effective for both those types of organisms. It's relative for a type of organisms that do not form spores or viruses. So for general cleaning, chlorine is a good source. Its activity is reduced in the presence of organic material or foreign material. So again, we go back to the first step is always cleaning before we do anything else. It's very ineffective if our water pipes have biofilm in it, because the biofilm protects the bacteria, because the chlorine does not penetrate that biofilm. So it has limited use in disinfecting power of water lines that have biofilms in them. However, it is an effective way of doing it if our biofilms are at a minimum. Hydrogen peroxide is a way of a lot of products on the market that contain hydrogen peroxide. In the presence of organic material, hydrogen peroxide will dissolve in water and have and gaseous oxygen. This results in oxidizing power that limits the bacteria, and its cleaning power is is good because the gas in the pipes help reduce the biofilm in the pipe. So it's kind of a two-phase activity. By doing that, we can also, flush the water lines and get some of that biofilm out. Hydrogen peroxide is effective, but it's not effective against spore-forming bacteria. Things like Clostridia are not effective. And it will not drop the pH. It will be on the other side of neutral. There are organic acids out there that are commercially available. They will cause a drop in pH. The acidification creates a less favorable environment for many of the microorganisms. It helps on the destruction of the biofilm. It also, because it's lowering the pH, improves digestion, slow passage of feed through the gut, and increases nutrient absorption. This will help the gut as well as the water line. Cleaning and disinfecting your house. A lot of times in the northern areas, we're going to shut down our poultry houses as tight as we can to conserve heat. As springtime comes about, it's maybe time to have a good cleaning and disinfecting after we've gone into that period of having birds in close confinement. If you're getting new birds in or replacing a flock, this is also a good time to put some effort into cleaning and disinfecting the house. Cleaning and disinfecting, it is very effective to work with because it can help control Merrick's disease, mycoplasmas, respiratory viruses, E. coli, and also infects with our bed bugs and our mites and any other health problems, including helping to control Salmonella enteritidis, which is a salmonella that can colonize the bird's digestive tract and can actually affect the reproductive tract, and the bird will produce contaminated eggs. But keep in mind that as we go into come out of that high confinement time, we can come into a clean house would be great. We're going to C&D. We're going to first remove all the birds from the building to be clean, take out the equipment that's in the house, clean that separately. Example would be feeders and waters, or it could be nesting boxes, things that can be removed easily. Take them out, clean them somewhere else. The next thing is dry sweeping. A little sweeping brings down our dust, whether you use a blower or use a broom, taking off the loose dust off of the ceilings, the light fixtures, any walls and things. It's particularly as we got cobwebs in the house, things of that nature. Clean that up. Remove all the feed from the feeders as well. This is a good time to scrape the manure out, clean up or remove the litter from the floor. Also scrape and clean our perches and roosts. If you get them out of the building, it's a good time to take them out. Remove as much dry material as possible. If you're using a small area, you can use a shop vac, or you can use a blower pack to get the materials out of the house. When we're ready to clean and do a wet cleaning, the first thing is make sure you understand that the electricity and water do not go well together. You may want to turn off the power to the building, especially if you have some open outlets or uncovered outlets. That would be a good idea. One is make sure you use enough water that you're getting a cleaning of it. Make sure you're washing and then you rinse off any of the substances you use. Warm or hot water would do a better job, but you know, you may not have that ability. There's lots of power washers out there that are reasonably priced. You might want to invest in one of those. And you can use a detergent that helps to break any films that's on water, on the any greasy films that are on the wood that may be on the walls or on the roofs. One of the things is you getting enough water penetration to get the cleaning materials into the wood. Particularly the perches and roosting areas, they will be caked up, they will be hard pressed. The floors themselves will be hard pressed. Make sure you got enough water that you soften up those films that are covering it. Low pressure spraying or a hose itself, making sure you use a lot of water on there to get that penetration. You don't want to use excess water, but you want enough that you do have that penetration. If you're looking at manure in the house or the bedding material, you don't want puddling up of water. Washing itself, make sure you clean every surface. I will tell a story on myself. I just started working at the poultry farm at the university I went to, not knowing a lot. They gave me the job of washing a poultry house. Didn't give me any instructions. Just sat there and said, here's the power washer and away you go. Well, wet was not washing is what I've learned, because I had to rewash everything I washed because I did not penetrate hard enough and break those films up. So make sure you get enough contact time with it and wash everything. Make sure you understand that the cracks and crevices are some of the areas we've got to get cleaned out. We can either use a neutral detergent or an alkaline detergent. Alkaline detergents are usually above 8 pH. Neutrals will be between 6 and 8, usually around 7. The alkaline surfaces vary in strength, with the strongest causing burns and internal injuries of solid. A mild alkaline substance is baking soda. A higher one would be some of the ammonias or borax or the triphosphates. Those are all things you can get and make your washing solution. You can use a high pressure sprayer, and they are effective if you take your time, get the penetration you need, and get that film off your substances. There's no substitution for a good brush scrubbing by manually scrubbing the area. And the other thing, just like the farm manager did to me when I didn't do it right, is make sure you inspect and look and see that all the dirt and all the manure has been removed from surfaces, which sometimes can be very difficult. Sometimes if we have metal surfaces, they can have hard scales on them, and you can use an acid detergent to break some of that hard water scale up. Things like some of the milder acids like vinegar and citric acid are really good at doing that. And then rinsing. The one thing we want to do is make sure there's no residues in there when we're at the washing stage, because even the detergents can interfere with our sanitizers and our disinfectants. Let the house dry, and once it's done, then you can use your disinfectant solutions on the surfaces. Make sure you're clean. Again, make sure that the house is dry, and then we can start disinfecting. Disinfecting is putting that disinfectant, which is commercial products that are out there, apply it all over the building. Make sure it's the equipment is clean. You can use sprays, aerosols, even fumigation. For most facilities, a small garden sprayer is the easiest method to get that out there. There are many good food grade sanitizers, disinfectants on the market. Use them with clean surfaces. Chlorine and lye are good germicides. They're usually inexpensive and can be used with care. But borax is also one that has a long time exposure to the organisms. Don't forget that sunlight is probably our cheapest sanitizer. Having sunlight penetrate areas such as pastures or outside runs is not a bad thing if we keep them empty for a few days and removed all the organic material. There's lots of different disinfectants. There's phenolics, which are things like Pine Sol or One Stroke. There are iodine based like Betadine and Adul. There's chlorine complexes that can form, but generic bleach is your cheapest disinfectant, along with Clorox. Primary ammonia contacts, the Quats are out there. Germex, some of these things are out there. There are a lot of products that are now used for poultry houses, like Viacron or Tectrol, that were actually developed for hospitals that are good oxidizing compounds that can disinfect the building. Whenever you're disinfecting, follow the manufacturer's directions for mixing and diluting. It's not necessarily true that more is better when we talk about disinfectants. The effective dosage is on the label. That's what you should be using. And usually we're talking about 1 gallon of diluted disinfectant per 100 square feet. If we're going to soap waters, you might want to use 200 parts per million of chlorine. And then the temperature itself. If we're going to use chlorine or iodine based, make sure it's above 6, not at freezing, up at the 60 at room temperature, but don't go too high and exceed 100 to 110 degrees. There is no single disinfectant best for all purposes, so choose the right one for your situation. And that situation includes the type of surfaces you're going to be disinfecting, the history of the farm you're working with, what organisms are you trying to compare, and whether or not those disinfectants will work against it. The pH value, whether it's acid or basic, they're both effective, but make sure you're using one that's in the right pH range for the organism you're trying to control. And when you're in the market for a disinfectant, look around for a broad spectrum disinfectant, some that will work on a multiple of microorganisms or viruses and fungi. Don't just, there are some that are very specific, but a broad spectrum one for the small flock owner is probably the best deal. And capability, make sure that you're using the right soap in regards to the disinfectant. Make sure you concentrate on how much you will require each time you use the disinfectant. And environmental safety. What is the check on the substances you're using, and if they're going to be harmful for the environment. If they're going to be harmful for the environment, you might want to choose a different disinfectant. One of the best that we have is hydrogen peroxide. It's a good disinfectant properties. It's long been established as a household cleaner. It can kill viruses, bacteria, and other germs. It's going to deactivate microorganisms, so it destroys the essential components of the germ cells. It's especially effective on hard surfaces. There are some products on there that are stable hydrogen peroxide products that can be used. Some of you may think about buying some ultraviolet light. They're not effective for destroying bacteria, microorganisms in a poultry production facility, because most of the systems are using a small area or intensive area for the light to shine in on. So while they're effective in regards to what they do in many places, they're not effective for large areas, and you have to be free of dust and you have to be exposed to the direct rays. So in summary, isolation of your flock from other flocks and isolation of within your flock are very important. Clean before disinfecting. Make sure you have a clean house that you're trying to sanitize or disinfect. Choose your disinfectant for your situation. Make sure it's appropriate. The appropriate one for the detergents that you're going to be using. You cannot clean and disinfect dirt or soil materials. Especially pay attention to your water supply. And lastly, deal with disease situations quickly. If you're starting to see mortality, find out what you're dealing with. Isolate birds that are sick. Isolate pens that are sick. Make a flow of the healthy birds to the sick birds, but don't go the reverse. So with that, I hope this gives you some idea that how important cleaning, disinfecting, and sanitizing is in controlling diseases. And we all want our birds to be happy and healthy, and we want to enjoy our flocks. And the best way we can do that is keeping disease out. With that, I'll entertain any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. You might want to stop sharing. We have a couple of questions. Here, I can stop you
I
sharing.
got it.
You got it?
Got it.
Is oxine a good choice for disinfecting? Oxine is a chlorine dioxide product that is approved for organic use by EPA, OMRI, all those.
Yes, it is. Actually, it's a very good, because of the chlorine dioxide will form the chlorine gas, the chlorine. It does a good job for in water systems as well as on surfaces.
How often should the water lines and drinkers be sanitized for adult and juvenile birds?
Depends on, I'll start with it depends. Depends on the quality of the water you're using. If you have high quality chlorinated water coming from a county system or a city system, you don't need to be very effective, very frequent with it. However, if you have pond water or you're storing water, I would do it probably on a every 2-month basis.
Okay. What works well to remove mineral deposits?
We talked about the hydrogen peroxide. There are things like rust away and things like that that can be used on that, as long as you rinse cleanly and before you let the birds have access to it again.
Okay. And did I hear you correctly that hydrogen peroxide will break down biofilm?
Yes.
Okay. What about if you are on well water? I'm sure that was related to the sanitizing water pipes.
Again, if you're on well water, make sure you're tested it for it being potable water. But because you don't have the chlorine in it, the bacteria can grow in there. So having a routine of sanitizing your water system every 2 to 3 months would be a good idea.
And flushing after sanitizing.
And flushing,
right?
yes.
Those are all the ones in the Q&A. Anybody have any? I didn't see any in the chat box. I did put in our extension website, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel. And let me see what is next month's webinar. Is organizing a county poultry show. So if you haven't done one of those and want to figure out how to do it, we have someone who organizes the Big Ohio show, poultry show, that's giving the presentation. October is respiratory issues with poultry, the #1 type of disease poultry have. November is designing a small flock poultry house, and the last one in December is managing a poultry flock on pasture. I am putting together topics for next year, so if there's a topic that has not been covered in any of our past webinars, or that you would like repeated from, if it was done 5 years ago, please email me so that I can add it to the list of topics to look for speakers for. That's my email. So any topic suggestions, please send them to me. I'm not seeing any more questions. So thank you very much, Dr. Pescatore, for your presentation. Very informative. Especially as we deal with a lot of the potential disease problems that have been going around of late. thankfully, the avian influenza seems to have cleared up. So let's hope we keep it away by following good biosecurity. So I'm going to stop the recording